For what purpose, gentleman from Texas, rise?
An amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 23, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Paul of Texas.
Pursuant to the order of the House of Thursday, July 29, 1999, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Paul, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. What purpose, gentleman from Alabama, rise?
To claim opposition time.
Gentleman will be recognized in 5 minutes in opposition. The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes on his amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
I yield myself 3 minutes.
Gentleman may proceed.
Mr. Chairman, this amendment provides that no funds for new obligation guarantees or agreements can be issued under the Export-Import Bank, under OPIC, or under IDA, under the Trade Development Agency. This, again, is an attempt to try to slow up the amount of dollars that flow into corporations and for their benefit specifically, as well as our foreign competitors. China, for instance, receives the largest amount of money from the Export-Import Bank. Outstanding liabilities for the Export-Import Bank now is $55 billion. There's $5.9 billion have been granted to the Chinese. Last week, we had a very important vote on trade, and it was hotly debated over human rights issues. I voted to trade with China because I believe it's proper to trade with people. You're less likely to fight with them. And in this institution, too often, we use our terms carelessly, and we talk about free trade as being something which is managed trade. Free trade here generally means that we will have the NAFTA people managing trade, the World Trade Organization managing trade, and we will subsidize our businesses. Just this past week, we had the World Trade Organization rule against us that we grant $2 billion worth of tax benefits to our own corporations, and they ruled that that was illegal. And this is all done in the name of free trade. So I say that we should have free trade. We should trade with our friends and with anybody who will trade that we're not at war with. We should really be careful about issuing sanctions. But here we are. Last week we have the great debate, and a lot of people could not stand the idea of trading with Red China because of their human rights record. And I understand that, although I didn't accept that position, but this is the time to do something about it. Trading with Red China under true free trade is a benefit to both of us. It's a benefit to our consumer, and it benefits both countries because we're talking with people and we're not fighting with them. But it gets to be a serious problem when we tax our people in order to benefit those who are receiving the goods overseas. Now, if there is a worldwide downturn, this $55 billion of liabilities out there could be very significant in how it's going to be paid back. And the Chinese, right now, their economy is not all that healthy. They're talking about a devaluation. So this is a liability that the American taxpayers are exposed to. And if we do have a concern about Red China and the Chinese, yes, let's work with them, let's trade with them, but let's not subsidize them. And this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to stop this type of subsidies. So my bill, my amendment would stop any new obligation. It doesn't close down Export-Import Bank. It allows all the old loans to operate and function, but no new obligations can be made, no new guarantees, and no agreement, with the idea that someday we may truly move to free trade, that we don't recognize free trade as being subsidized trade as well as internationally managed trade with organizations such as NAFTA and World Trade Organization. Those institutions are not free trade institutions. They're managed trade institutions for the benefit of special interests. And that's what this type of funding is for. It's for the benefit of special interests, whether it's our domestic corporation, which indeed I would recognize does receive some benefit. 67% of all the funding of the Export-Import Bank goes to not a large number of countries, to 5 countries. And I'll bet you if you look at those 5 companies in this country that get 67% of the benefit and look at their political action record, you might be enlightened. I mean, I'll bet you we would learn something about where that money goes, because they're big corporations and they benefit, and they'll have their defenders here. It's time we look carefully at these subsidies.
Gentleman from Alabama.
Mr. Chairman, in opposition to the amendment, I yield myself such time as I may consume. Does the gentlelady from California wish to be heard?
At the gentleman's...
I will yield then
Thank you.
1 minute to the gentlelady from California.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment, and in doing so, I want to correct the record. Those of us who were asking for raising tariffs on products coming from China were not interested in cutting off trade with China. What we were doing is to say, let's have the same reciprocity between our two countries as we would expect from other countries. But then to use that and say it's all right to give a $70 billion trade surplus to the regime so they can strengthen their hold on the people of China, but we should take out our concerns with China on the Ex-Im Bank, I think is very inappropriate, and that's why I oppose it. The Ex-Im Bank does not subsidize the Chinese government. The Ex-Im Bank subsidizes U.S. manufacturers selling into countries, including China. The Paul Amendment would not allow the Export Impact to assume any new business. This would mean that all of the Ex-Im's resources would be used to liquidate existing transactions. In other words, Ex-Im would slowly, gradually shut down. Now, I agree with the gentleman, 30 additional seconds, Mr. Chairman. I agree with the chairman that we must subject the Ex-Im, OPIC, and all of these institutions to harsh scrutiny. Are they performing the task that is their established purpose, to promote U.S. exports? And the Ex-Im Bank, I think, from the scrutiny we subjected to in our committee, does that, and that the gentleman's amendment is ill-advised, and the same would apply to OPIC, which, by the way, does not operate in China. So I urge our colleagues to oppose this amendment for many more reasons than I have time to go into, but yield back to the distinguished chairman. Thank you.
Gentleman from Alabama.
Mr. Chairman, we've already discussed the impact of the closing down of OPIC earlier tonight. And you can see that the will of the House certainly agreed with those of us who think that we must have this competitive level playing field with the rest of the G7 nations. The gentleman from Texas is absolutely right when it comes to basic sounding good things. A feel-good amendment. When he talks about Ex-Im Bank giving money to Red China. Ex-Im Bank does not give money to Red China. Ex-Im Bank loans money to American businesses to establish programs in Red China. There's no prohibition against Red China coming to the United States to invest with the support of a similar organization in China. What we're saying is that we want to be just like the rest of the world when it comes to global economy. This is a global economy, and the only way our people can participate in global economy is to have the same advantages as do Canada, as do Japan, as do Germany, as do France. We need this in order to work today in a global economy. So we're not talking about losing money. That's not the question here. Ex-Im Bank is not losing money. We're talking about whether or not we're going to have a financing capability that will enable American jobs to be exported to all of the countries that the gentleman from Texas mentioned. So, Mr. Chairman, I think it's the same debate that we had on OPIC, except this one is twice as bad because also he closes down the Ex-Im Bank as well and cuts off the ability of American business people to do business in most any foreign country, and I urge opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to point out that it is truly a subsidy to a foreign corporation, a foreign government. For Red China, corporations and governments are essentially identical. They're not really quite in the free market yet. But the gentleman from Alabama points out that, no, that's not true. The money doesn't go to Red China and they buy things. We just give it directly. We don't even send it round trip. This is true. We take taxpayers' money. We take taxpayers' guarantee. We give them to those 5 huge corporations that do 7% of the business. We give them the money. But where do the goods go? Do the goods go to the American taxpayers? No, they get all the liability. The subsidies helps the Chinese. So, yes, technically, yes, we don't send the money there, but who's going to pay it back? The Chinese pays the loan back. If they default, who pays the bill if the Chinese default? Not yet right now. I don't have enough time. But who pays the bill if they default? It's obviously the taxpayers. And what I'm pointing out is that $5.9 billion that the Chinese now have borrowed from us through the Export-Import Bank is a significant obligation that's on the backs of the American taxpayer. So I urge support for the amendment, because if we are serious about free trade, we should not just, please don't call it free trade anymore. Call it managed trade, call it subsidized trade, call it special interest trade, but please don't call it free trade anymore, because it's not free trade. And I yield back.
Time of the gentleman's expired. Gentleman from Alabama.
In closing, Mr. Chairman, I would just like to say that the $16 billion, or whatever figure he's using that goes to China, goes in the form of things like airplanes. Yes, a lot of it goes to Boeing, which is a huge corporation. But the benefit that the American taxpayers receive are the thousands of jobs that Boeing provides in order to export this plane to China, who pays for it. And if indeed there was some problem, we can always go and get the airplanes back. It's not like we're giving something away. We're creating jobs. And I might tell you that many of those Boeing jobs are located in the state of Alabama.
Chairman, you'll back the balance of his time. All time has expired on this amendment. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Paul. Those in favor of the amendment will say aye. Those opposed will say no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Gentleman from Texas.
Ask for a recorded vote.
Gentleman asked for a recorded vote pursuant to House Resolution 263. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas will be postponed.